Hello, everybody, and welcome to this number 3 in our series on Agile Procurement. And I am fortunate to have with me again David Kershaw, who is the co-founder of Curshaw, a new commercial advisory focusing on applying agile ways of working to the procurement of digital commercial transformation and PFI expiry, and Mirko Kleiner, who is the founder of Flow Days and the originator of Lean-Agile Procurement, a new and simple approach to procurement. Hello, both.
Hello, John. Hello, Mirko.
So,
hi, guys.
The mention I made there of Lean-Agile Procurement, a simple approach to procurement, is probably quite appropriate for this session because in one of our earlier conversations, I was blithely talking about procurement as being a complex function. And you very rightly put me straight on the fact that actually it doesn't need to be complex. And one of the reasons why I thought it was, there's this, I quite often quote this old military saying that says, amateurs talk about strategy, professionals talk about logistics. And that sort of indicates that logistics, which is I think of it as a function and maybe a metaphor for procurement, is something that requires a professional to do it and is therefore difficult and complex, and people like me couldn't do it. However, I'm questioning now whether or not that's actually the case. And I think it would be very useful to hear from the two of you as procurement professionals, and particularly agile procurement professionals, whether or not procurement is actually as complex as people like me think. David, can I come to you first on that?
Yeah, of course. And thank you again for this next session, John. So I think procurement is complex at the moment in the public sector, but it doesn't have to be complex. The reason I think it is complex is because many years of people buying stuff, the fear of legislation, getting things wrong and therefore being pulled up into a court or losing your job for doing something wrong, the fear of the fact you're spending somebody else's money. Is it in the private sector you're spending shareholders' money, in the public sector you're spending taxpayers' money, and there is a big concern about that. And what's happened over the years, lots and lots of process, lots of culture around that process has been created and built. And therefore, it's made procurement complex. Now, I know it doesn't have to be that complex. Simple things like making language easy to understand, plain language, reducing the amount of sentences used in guidance, question whether you actually need that piece of guidance, that document, that thing. And also often procurement buying people, they are the ones who negotiate. Now, as we know, the three of us, we would rather collaborate over negotiate. But we are sort of procurement people, we are the ones who help lead in that negotiation. So it is complex at the moment. It doesn't have to be complex. And we are seeing now lots of organizations questioning each of their individual categories and making each category simpler and more specific to the category, and making the processes simpler to the category they're trying to procure services for.
Right, okay, excellent. So in a sense then, in the public sector at least, what we see is a sort of complexity by design, not necessarily deliberately, but it has grown up because of the, let's say the challenges of procurement, but also the risks associated with getting it wrong. Mirko, is that what you see also largely in the private sector?
First of all, I need to admit, you mentioned I'm a procurement professional. I'm not.
Right, okay.
But nevertheless, made my opinion on that, and I work day by day with procurement professionals. So I'm observing several things. You guys mentioned procurement is complex. In my definition of complexity, it's not. Because it's a transactional process, you can write it down. It's more or less like a checklist, if you will. I'm simplifying, David. But the thing is, the process, or you mentioned categories, is a way of getting to cope with the complexity of the sourcing cases, right? And for me, it's like there are tools like a hammer and a nail, right? So this transactional process work and categories work super cool, is appropriate for all this commodity sourcing stuff. So things, product, services we just can take from the shelf. I mean, several years ago, buying a laptop would be a complex case. With today, it's almost simple, right? It's just going on Amazon and ordering. While if it comes to systems that needs to be integrated, that will change processes in a company, for example, this makes the case complex. And therefore, that's my opinion. We need new tools or approaches, if you like. So for me, it's very important. All the tools, the hammers and stuff we know in procurement, they're still valid. And there's nothing wrong about it. But we need to use the right tool for the right problem. Right. And there things get weird. Just to give an example, if you imagine the most complex sourcing case and you as a vendor have the capability and products and services behind to do that, and you get invited for a reverse auction. It makes no sense. It's all about the price, right? Reverse auction is a beautiful tool if there is a defined product that has a lot of, it's a commodity. You can buy it everywhere in every country, etc. So it's a wrong tool, right, for sourcing something super complex. And I think we need to work on this awareness.
That's very interesting, because the as you were talking, what was coming out there was this almost a theme about simplification. And David, you mentioned yourself when in your introductory remarks about the needs to think in terms of simplifying things. And it seems to be picking up on that transaction idea, Mirko, that you just mentioned. Transactional approach is great for products because there's a relatively simple outcome that's required. Here are some products, we need to buy them. Let's just talk about how we do that as a process. Systems, by definition, are different and are more complicated, and therefore perhaps become more complex because they add layers of transaction to them. So maybe then one of the approaches to making things less complex, say in the public sector, David, would be, how do we simplify, how do we turn into bite-sized chunks the kind of projects that we've got? Is that the sort of thing that you do when you approach a public sector project with an agile mindset?
Absolutely, John. Well, the first thing to do is to dissect the word procurement. So,
right.
You want to apply agile ways of working to procurement. Mirko and I were speaking on Monday actually about agile contracts, and we were saying you can't apply agile ways of working to everything. So, firstly, dissect the word procurement. Are you buying something? Are you commissioning something? Are you sourcing something? Are you contract managing? Are you creating a specification? Are you doing market engagement? Are you supplier relationship management? The list goes on.
Yeah.
So the first thing I do is say, okay, what are we looking at here? If we're just buying something, like Mirko mentioned a minute ago, a high prioritized item, a phone or a laptop or a can of Coke or something that's easy to understand the price, utilities, for example, then absolutely, let's simplify those processes. Contract management, again, how can we apply agile ways of working to contract management? Instead of me, as if I was a contract manager, instead of me seeing the service provider once every 6 months or once a year for a big whole day and just taking a snapshot of them on that one day, I want to embed myself into that team. And actually, this virtual way of doing things, you can do it like that. So having a regular cadence, a regular drumbeat with that service provider. So absolutely, you can apply agile ways of working to contract management. It gives you more rich information. The information is easier to get, quicker to get. It's more up to date. It's regular, and you can actually again, something Mirko and I was talking about on Monday. If something's going to fail, you can fail it quickly, Stop it. Cost, less embarrassment. Hopefully you won't have to go to court because you can agree something between the two parties. So as I say, the first thing to do is dissect procurement as a title, as a definition, what are you trying to look at? And then from there, look at your category or what you're trying to do. Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a new thing you're trying to create that's never been done before? That's exactly the sweet spot of where Agile really works.
That's great, because this idea of understanding that procurement is a word that encapsulates a whole plethora of different functions and processes and stuff like that. And actually, back to this idea of simplifying and deconstructing that word. And actually, we mentioned Amazon and Coke. I should say for all of our viewers, there are other platforms and beverages are available. But I'm quite interested in this idea of what you just mentioned, David, about being embedded in the team. Helps, and one might almost say, of course, helps, because you get much closer to the process and the people involved, and that actually the way we're operating at the moment virtually can help with that process. And I was just thinking, Mirko, does that fit with the engagement you're having with clients? The fact that actually we're all pretty much virtual at the moment. Is this actually helping rather than hindering some of the thought processes people need to go through?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's more of a culture question. Are we are procurement, we are whatever, the business or whatever, and we are capable to do everything, and we don't need the others, or we have defined interfaces and we just throw it over the bench. I think yes. On the other hand, with this Corona crisis and working virtual, it's easier to add people, to embed people, but on the other hand, it's also very hard to stay embedded and being part of the team, because you don't have this nice coffee talks and all these things between the line. So I think it's sometimes what I'm seeing in procurement currently is happening, or was happening, driven by the crisis, is that businesses had to collaborate because of a closed border. They lost connection to one of their first or second tier supplier, and they needed to find another one. So overnight, they needed to cope with that and find a solution. Otherwise, the whole business would be paused. And I think for me that's very optimistic. I'm very optimistic because of that. That are examples that shows, hey, it could work. It's a crisis. It's an exception. So how we can learn from this exception and bring that to the normal, to the new normal.
Right. David, yes. Sorry, carry on.
To pick up on that point that Mirko made about the coffee break, that is the number one tip. If you're a procurement professional, just get off the floor you're working at, go to a different floor, the person you're servicing, and go and say, would like a coffee. Ideally, the procurement person will get that person to buy the coffee for them.
They're in procurement after all.
You can afford that as a saving, and that'll help for our bonus. But no, so this is true. This is how I got into Agile, John. I worked at the digital service, and the first week, I went to have a coffee with somebody, and he was saying, "Oh, so how are we going to procure this thing?" And I said, "Oh, for the last 10 years, I've done this 100-step thing, and you have to do this before this, before this, before this." And he said, "Well, why don't you do it like this?" And over the course of that week, I started to learn about this thing called Agile, right? And all the different things that were about Agile. That person then introduced me to his team. That team started to learn about procurement. And instead of doing the step-by-step, we could actually do things at different times. So we could actually get things sooner, quicker, and that was all because I went and said, "Hello, I'm a procurement person. Let's have a cup of tea or a coffee, and let's have a chat." Now, one could argue, is that a good use of the procurement person's time? I know I've worked at organisations where line managers in procurement were very adamant where you were every half an hour. I convinced my colleagues there to let me invest in that team, and it was the best move I've made professionally to learn about how to apply agile ways of working, how to make things lean. And always remember, in my world, in procurement, be it public or private, there are always those firewalls. When you tender, you have to have a firewall here, do your competition to make sure it's fair and compliant, and there's always that, you can't get around that because that's the whole point of competition. And a bit like sports, make sure there's no doping in the 100-meter event or something. But apart from that area, you can be a lot more free to move and talk.
That's really interesting, because it makes me think that, because what we're talking about is complexity or not within the procurement process, and what's coming out here is that actually if I call them the technical or mechanical or physical bits of procurement, because for me as a layperson, procurement is the art of marshalling resources so that you get a fulfilled outcome. And all the technical bits, the bits of kit and the hardware, the software, all that sort of stuff, actually, they don't have personalities. There's nothing peculiar about that. They exist or they don't exist. Maybe the complexity is in the people and the relationships within that procurement operation, whether it's the procurement team or it's the client or whoever it is. So just picking up on your point, David, about engaging, and as Mirko said, around the coffee break, maybe that's in a sense, the only sensible antidote to potential complexity is to actually connect with people. Because if the complexity exists in relationships, the easiest way to get over that is actually to, I nearly said manage. Maybe that's the right way to think about it, actually, to manage the relationships so that they're positive rather than conflict-based or whatever. Does that sound like it makes sense?
I would like to add something to that, because people could understand then that just because of a better collaboration, we cope with complexity. Just imagine something like innovation. Complexity has to do a lot with surprises, with unexpected behaviors of the customer, of the market, and so on. And the question we ask is, how can we source, find a partner product for something like that, with that complexity, with that surprises? And to cope with that complexity, we need to build a certain level of complexity, and this is a cross-functional team. Now, we have done that for years, for many, many years, in the delivery. At first, we had the developers in it, then we put quality assurance people in it, then we realized it's not enough. We need to cope with operations, so we put those. Business became in the driver's seat, and now I think it's the time to think this idea of DevOps a step forward, just on the other side of the chain. So we still have the business as a driver, but if it's about if the case touches some certain areas of compliance, then why we don't have somebody in the team that brings in this capability around compliance? If we have to develop a new contractual framework, why we don't have somebody from the legal team? And so it's the same story for procurement people. So what you just naturally did, David, just makes sense. I mean, we are seeing companies out there, the old-fashioned word would be, we are the business partners. We are building bridges. No, it's more a question about, I mean, that could be the first step, don't get me wrong. But more effective is if you get people embedded, right? And that could be for a certain team because it's a strategic initiative, it's the most important thing, or for a certain product area, like procurement did in the past with the categories, right? But on the other hand, I'm hearing people in procurement saying, we need to develop procurement people into new topics like AI and whatever, VR and all these topics. Nonsense. if we have the right people, some developer or some expert that knows everything about AI, and we bring the capabilities of procurement together, then we can step much faster forward than first building up knowledge about AI in procurement. That's my opinion. I don't know how you see that, David.
Interesting. I'm actually seeing more non-procurement people becoming good at procurement. So the UK government has a digital buying community of practice, focusing purely on the buyer. So all public sector people that buy digital things, and they are digital outcomes, digital services, digital specialisms. That started with 1 or 2 people. Last week, there was 75 people on this, and you're getting technical experts, so delivery managers, developers, product managers. They're learning about procurement, and I've seen in some very, very modern departments, modern teams within departments, they're actually allowing these non-procurement people to do procurement. This is a great thing because it allows procurement people like myself to focus on the strategy of where a category is going, rather than being bogged down in the procurement of things. And just to add, in terms about the cultural thing, which adds complexity, I work in so many different organizations where the procurement team sits on one floor on their own, 5 people or 1,000 people, and they just wait for these emails to come through. They're working, but they wait for these emails to come through. I sort of say, I don't think a procurement team needs a floor or needs an office. It needs to be out in the team servicing. And actually now, this virtual way of working, if you have a procurement team in a floor for a reason, is that because you want the head of procurement to give them a weekly talk or a weekly presentation? That's fine, but you can do it via this.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is really interesting because the thought process that has produced. I mean, if we start with this idea that there might be complexity on the demand side, okay, the project itself might be quite complex in terms of the systems that need to be procured and stuff like that. That requires a complexity in the response, an ability to respond to that complexity, which cannot be completely encapsulated in a procurement individual, a professional, or indeed often in a procurement team. So we then need to pull in experts in some of the elements of those functions, whether it's legal or risk or compliance or whatever it is, all of the things that wrap around the project as well as the things within it. So the procurement professional becomes increasingly a commissioning person. I am overseeing the project, and I'm commissioning, I'm pulling in all of those resources, a bit like a consultancy might, which aren't part of my team directly, yet which I will need in order to have a positive impact on the outcome of this process. And there's a phrase which is, and anything that a human being can do, which should be done by a computer, should be done by a computer, because that frees up human beings to do things that only human beings can do. Maybe the same is true of procurement professionals, because actually there must be loads of things that you already know, as you've illustrated, that procurement professionals get pulled into, which actually isn't a very high quality use of their time. So actually there are other people who could do that function better, whereas the procurement person orchestrates the procurement outcome. Does that sound too vague and esoteric?
I see 2 developments currently out there. So first, going back to the tools. If procurement people have different tools and approaches, they could definitely become such a facilitator. But in my opinion, the product, the service, whatever we are looking for, should always be driven by the business. Always. That's like the core of Agile, right? We have the product only.
Yep.
So the second thing, and that's an interesting point that David came through, is spreading the knowledge, right? Could become another role for procurement professionals like coaches. So just imagine several years ago, we had this function, quality assurance. And now quality in a software team is just the capability. And still we have the experts, but it's a capability and the responsibility of the whole team. And unless it's not a very specific, special case, they try to do everything their own, right? So that's another development we see out there. And I totally agree, there is no need for, and a lot of procurement people might hate me, but there is no need to have extra floors. I mean, there is also no need to have extra floors for the C-suite, right? We should organize ourselves around the products, around the market demands, and then we become a true agile organization.
Excellent. David, do you want to just respond to that? Because putting aside the idea that Mirko's just alienated all of the procurement fraternity and the whole of every C-suite by saying they don't need an office. Do you think that that point that you mentioned, getting out, embedding, what was it? Mao Zedong called it fish swimming in the sea of the people.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things I like to do. I get a kick out of going to organisations that have really find procurement baffling and hard, and it's 100 miles an hour and quick. And I like to go in and say, right, slow down. Let's think what we're doing. What do you have to achieve? When do you have to achieve it? This is going back to Mirko's business objectives, right? What's the MVP for something? What's the minimum viable product for something? And then let's apply minimum viable procurement to that thing, right?
Yeah.
And so a bit of a play there on words, but that's what I try and do. I try and bring in a minimum viable procurement. Now, we haven't got the time, nor probably the audience want to know about the ins and outs of all the parts of procurement and legislation and challenges and procurement routes and all this stuff, right? There's lots of stuff to know. And the procurement person, the procurement team are experts in knowing that stuff. It goes back to Mirko's thing about quality. However, when I talk about a procurement person going in and being embedded for contract management, I actually think the service people could be doing that, the people who are working with the provider. So, let's try and train or coach or share some knowledge. And it's 50-50. It goes both ways. As a procurement person, I want to teach a colleague about how to contract manage something, but equally, I want to learn something from them about their thing they're doing. So next time I have to procure a framework agreement or a dynamic purchasing system or a big strategic procurement thing, I know more about the subject I'm buying. And this also goes back to the cans I talked about. It's easy to say a can of something is simple. Well, there's a lot that goes into the manufacturing of that, the speed of manufacturing, the metal, the compression, the whatever. So you have to have a subject matter expertise in the thing you're buying. It's really important if you invest your time in that.
Okay, no, this is really good because there's almost a logical evolution of procurement in this. If we look at procurement delivery, if I call it that, this is doing the procurement function and process and all of that practical outcome delivery. The second one, which is a sort of layer up from that, is procurement facilitation, which is bringing in all of those other people and helping them to deliver the business outcome that's required. And then the top level is the point that I think both of you touched on, which is this idea of procurement professionals as coaches of the business, really, such that in a way, the procurement is probably one of the most vital functions in delivering a business need. Because actually, amateurs talk about strategy, professionals talk about logistics. So actually, for the procurement professionals to be coaching some of the other professionals within the business could actually help support the outcome the business need in ways which other functions couldn't. So there's a progression of not just the importance, but of the professionalism of procurement there. It also picks up that point, David, about procurement professionals finding it useful to learn more about other elements of the business. in order to become themselves much better at procurement. Okay, we are coming to the close of our half-hour conversation, which seems to have flown by at breakneck pace, I think, really. And one of the things that comes out of this to me very strongly is that we can't stop the conversation here. We need to do some more of these. And I think, picking up on one of the things that's been said, we might need to dig a little deeper into one element of procurement, and then another, because I'm sure that some of our audience would like to hear more about not just how things might be done, but some examples of how things have been done in terms of agile procurement. So if I can rely upon you two gentlemen to make yourselves available at some point in the future, and we might look at say an hour-long session which looks at some practicalities and how delivery might be made. So coming out of that, we've looked at what I thought was complex, discovered that it's not necessarily complex, yet actually might sometimes need to be by design, thinking about language, which can make it or break the complexity, simplifying things, disaggregating the word procurement so that the procurement professional can approach the delivery in a way that is not quite transactional, but maybe less complex, and then making sure that procurement professionals do actually what they do best, which is engaging with people and doing that within the teams that they're supporting and servicing. David Kershaw, co-founder of Curshaw, and Mirko Kleiner, founder of Flow Days, thank you very much indeed again for a really good and very enlightening half an hour, and I will definitely be in touch again around this. Thank you very much indeed, both of you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.